2 ice scrapers, paper towel roll, miscellaneous hardware, used fuel pump, couple belts, hairbrush, 4 sparkletors, a mirror, and a chunk of a grill.
Derek once drove a car that had not moved in 20 years, and the brakes barely worked the whole way. On his show, he finds old cars left in fields, barns, and even swamps. Some are full of rats, plants, or mud, and most people would just walk away. But he fixes them fast, starts the engine, and takes them on long, risky trips. Tune in to the moment the truck shook so hard, it almost split in two while pulling a trailer. Derek's wildest car saves. Derek Bieri doesn't just fix old cars, he takes wrecks that should be dead and drives them across the country. On his channel, Vice Grip Garage, he finds rusted out wrecks in barns, fields, and swamps, gives them a slapdash fix, and somehow gets them running again. Most of these machines haven't seen a working engine in years, but he doesn't wait for perfection. He makes them move no matter what it takes. But just when it's about to fail, he makes the impossible happen. Take that Plymouth Fury from the 70s. Big boat of a car. It looked like it had lost a fight with time and then rolled into a swamp to hide. He didn't care. He got in there, elbow deep in grime, and replaced just about everything that could be replaced without buying a new car. He rebuilt the guts, cleaned the rust off like it owed him money, and even hunted down parts that haven't been made since bell-bottoms were cool. And somehow, the beast roared back. It didn't purr. It roared.
It was probably a really nice looking color back in the day. I imagine it was a lot darker red, like a deep burgundy or wine color. She got clobbered.
Then came the Bel Air from the 50s. Now this thing was less car and more metallic skeleton when he found it. No shine, no spark, just sadness on wheels. But the man has a soft spot for old cruisers. He patched it up, color matched the paint like he was picking out eyeshadow, and scrubbed that interior until it didn't smell like raccoons. By the time he was done, the car looked like it had just rolled out of a 1950s commercial, except now it could actually go above 20 miles per hour without rattling apart. And don't forget the Mustang. Classic 60s muscle. But when he found it, it was more like classic 60s paperweight. The thing barely had any engine left to fix. He dug in, ripped out the junk, rebuilt the engine like a Lego set from hell, and somehow made it drive better than most modern cars. When that Mustang hit the road again, it didn't just drive, it strutted. Another one that really tested his limits? The Dodge Charger. Yep, another giant boat of steel left in a field to rust like it was part of a farm exhibit. He grabbed that thing and gave it a second shot at life. The fuel lines were trash, the engine was grumpy, and the whole thing looked like a raccoon apartment. But he fixed it. He cleaned, he patched, he rewired, sometimes with stuff that probably came from a toaster. And sure enough, the Charger lived again.
1964, maybe 1965-ish Chevrolet C10 pickup. And it's the short box flavor. Pretty solid truck, actually. I've owned this truck for years. I bought it from a feller.
Now let's talk about the Chevy C10 truck rescue. This one wasn't just rusty, it was practically compost. Moss on the dash, critter nests in the vents, and every bolt wanted to snap rather than budge. He jumped in like he was wrestling a bear. He cleaned it with more degreaser than a fast food kitchen, patched up the fuel tank with stuff that probably belonged in a bathroom, and somehow the truck coughed, sputtered, and rolled out like it had just woken from a bad nap. The shocks were still angry, and it bounced like a trampoline on bumps, but it moved. It even pulled a trailer a few days later, just to show it could. Now there's the Lincoln Continental, a massive steel couch on wheels. He got one that had been parked so long, the ground swallowed the tires. Everything inside smelled like an attic and old socks. But he scrubbed, rewired, and even found a way to make those old electric windows work again. When it finally rolled out, it looked like a presidential parade float, complete with wobbly suspension and the loudest horn this side of a semi-truck. The Cadillac Coupe de Ville was another wild one. Long, low, and forgotten in a barn that was collapsing on top of it. Most folks would have run from that mess. He cleared the roof off, aired up the tires, and started working on a car that hadn't seen daylight since people used landlines. The fuel tank was sludge. The battery was missing. Mice had turned the trunk into a studio apartment, but he powered through. And when that giant Cadillac roared back to life, it shook dust off like a dinosaur waking up.
1956 Buick, two-door hardtop. What makes this one fairly unique and low production is it came factory with power steering and power brakes.
We're talking about that old 1956 Buick Special. This wasn't just any hunk of metal. It had been in his family for years, passed around like a casserole dish at a reunion until someone sold it off. But he, being the sentimental grease wizard he is, hunted it down and dragged it back home. It looked rough, like it had seen one too many winters and a couple of raccoons. The faded paint barely clung to the body, and every panel had a story told in dents and rust. He rolled up his sleeves, pulled out his tools, and turned the tired, beat-up Buick into something his grandpa would have nodded at with pride. The chrome came back to life under layers of grime. Every scratch, every ding, a family memory, polished and primed. By the time he was done, that Buick looked like it had been dipped in nostalgia and polished with love. He didn't stop at making it look pretty. He tuned the old engine until it ran smoother than a jazz record on a Sunday morning. The old carburetor, nearly fossilized, was coaxed back to life with patience and a little black magic. He kept the dash as close to original as possible, right down to the slightly cracked plastic knobs. The result? A rolling time capsule powered by grit and sentiment. He fixed wild cars before, but now things get louder and faster. Now it growls like new. Then came the 1970 Chevelle SS. This one came in loud, or would have if it wasn't practically dead. It had the attitude of a rock star and the condition of a washed-up garage band. The body was bent in weird places. The engine hadn't roared in decades, and the interior was a graveyard of old parts. Derek went full mad scientist. He scoured junkyards and late-night forums to hunt down original parts. The engine rebuild was a labor of love and possibly some blood. He cleaned up the frame, patched the rust, sanded it down to bare metal, and started from scratch. That big V8 came back with a voice deeper than thunder. The new paint job sparkled like a disco ball under the shop lights. When the Chevelle finally rolled out, it didn't just turn heads, it snapped necks. Every inch of that car was touched by his stubborn hands. The seats, reupholstered in a material that looked and felt like the 70s. The shifter still had the same scratch from someone's belt buckle decades ago. He didn't erase history. He celebrated it with new horsepower and a fresh coat of badass.
This beautiful 1967 Pontiac GTO has been hiding in a garage since 1982. 40 years, fellers and fellettes.
And then there was the 1965 Pontiac GTO. This one wasn't just neglected, it looked like it had lost a war. Rust had taken over every inch, and the interior was more rodent nest than car. He had to dig deep, literally. The floors were almost non-existent. The frame was hanging on by sheer willpower. But he got to work, starting with the chassis and slowly bringing the whole thing back from the dead. New panels, fresh wiring, rebuilt transmission. He left nothing untouched. The engine was tuned like a symphony, every cylinder firing in harmony. The paint was a deep, seductive red that looked like it would melt in the sun. By the time it rolled out of the garage, it didn't just run, it strutted with swagger. He even tracked down the correct badging for the model because half doing things is not in his DNA. The GTO didn't just survive, it aged like bourbon and came back stronger. Moving on to something more refined. The 1971 Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme. This one had class even in its worst state. The lines were still elegant, even though rust had eaten away at the corners. The vinyl top was torn, the chrome was dull, and the interior smelled like an attic. He didn't throw parts at it just to make it work. He kept the soul intact. Wherever he could, he kept the original pieces. The steering wheel, saved. The door handles, cleaned and polished. Even the old radio stayed, now updated inside but still looking vintage. The engine came back to life with a quiet growl, the kind that hints at power but doesn't need to brag. When it was finished, the Cutlass looked like a museum piece that wasn't afraid to stretch its legs. He even left a few faded spots on the trim to show the age. It wasn't about pretending the past didn't happen. It was about letting the car wear its years proudly.
That right there is what looks to be a really nice 69 Chevelle. Guy's actually keeping his distance here because she's got some shine on it, and quite frankly, I'm getting the anxieties already.
Then there was the 1966 Chevrolet Impala SS. This wasn't just a restoration, it was a full-blown revival. The car had structural damage, engine problems, and a body that had taken more hits than a piñata. He tackled it piece by piece. The brakes, the suspension, the steering, everything got the treatment. The interior was stripped down, cleaned up, and rebuilt with care. He made sure it kept its swagger, with the wide stance and sharp lines that made it iconic. When he was finished, it looked like something you'd see in an old magazine ad, only cleaner and meaner. The sound of the engine alone made people stop and stare. He kept the bench seat, rewired the whole electrical system, and added modern touches so subtle you wouldn't notice unless you really knew what you were looking at. The Impala became a stealthy mix of the past and present, all power and presence. The 1973 Ford Gran Torino Sport was next. Calling it rough would be generous. It was a rust bucket that looked like it had spent a decade buried in a swamp. The floors were paper thin, the seats were gone. The wheels looked like they were glued on with hope. But he, being Derek, rolled it into the garage and got to work. He cut out the worst parts, welded in new steel, and rebuilt everything from the inside out. The engine, once a sad pile of metal, came back like a boxer after 10 rounds. The paint job wasn't just a color, it was a statement. When the Torino rolled out, it was all muscle and menace. He didn't try to make it perfect, he made it bold. The Torino had scars and he made sure they were front and center. That car didn't whisper, it growled. He rescued a 1978 Dodge Monaco that had plants growing in the seats. He brought back a 1984 El Camino that had been turned into a chicken coop. He even took on an old Ford Fairlane that was sinking into the dirt behind an abandoned diner. Every time it was the same madness, a rolling disaster transformed into something worth staring at. That El Camino build? It was more rusty than steel. The engine looked like a science experiment gone wrong, but he brought it back. He replaced the frame mounts, rebuilt the cab, patched the floor, and tuned the engine until it roared again. The paint? Rough, but honestly, he left the scars, made it a badge of honor. And that Fairlane, the thing was so buried it needed to be dug out like a fossil. Tires melted, glass broken, everything either missing or ruined. But once again, he didn't walk away. He cleaned it up, worked it out, and gave it a second life. When it rolled out, it was part Frankenstein, part time machine, and all muscle. He made old cars run, but now the danger gets real. Fire, mold, and gravity, he fixed it anyway. Vice Grip Garage isn't just about fixing cars. It's about bringing stories back to life. Every dent tells a tale. Every patch of rust has a memory behind it. Derek doesn't just restore metal, he brings back the feeling. That rush of driving something real, something with history, something that fought to stay alive. And the best part? He shares every step, not with boring how-tos or long lists, with energy, passion, and just enough chaos to keep it fun. He doesn't wear gloves unless he has to. He makes mistakes, laughs it off, and keeps going. Because that's what it takes, not just knowledge but guts, not just skill, but heart. Let's take a good, hard look at the jobs that should have sent him packing. But him? He doesn't walk away. He walks in deeper. There was this poor, crusty old Buick. The thing looked like it had been used as a home for raccoons and then parked in a swamp. Smelled worse than a dead fish on a hot roof. He shows up, gives it some juice, and the engine answers with flames. Not a spark, not a pop. Straight up fireball from the engine bay like it was angry at the world. He lunged for the extinguisher, knocking over half his tools and sprayed until the smoke turned white. Eyebrows, gone. Arms, singed. The hood looked like someone tried cooking on it. That car wasn't just rusty, it wanted revenge, and it nearly got it. There was a Suburban that hadn't moved in years, left to rot on a hill with weeds growing through its floor. He got it started, sort of, and decided to let gravity do the rest. No brakes, steering that wobbled like jelly, tires that hadn't felt asphalt since the 80s. As the truck rolled downhill, it picked up speed fast. The road twisted. The wheels didn't. The brakes whispered but didn't bite. The camera guy stopped breathing. He held on, sweating bullets and gripping the wheel like it owed him money.
I'm gonna put some ice cube juice in it here, get this thing fired back up this morning and heat it up. Hopefully the head gaskets are good and it stays cool. We got quite a ways to go back to the shop, so if it can't stay cool here in the scrapyard, it definitely ain't gonna stay cool in the highway.
It hopped a curb and kissed a bush with the grace of a bowling ball. The truck rolled to a stop somehow. But for a minute there, that ride was a coffin on wheels. Driving an Oldsmobile down the highway sounds innocent, unless the tires were last inspected during the Nixon administration. He was cruising along, wind in his hair, when the rear tire blew up with a sound like a shotgun. The car jerked left, then right, the whole body twitching like a rodeo bull. He held on, locked in place by pure fear and grip strength. He managed to guide it off the road while every driver nearby hit the brakes. The tire had exploded from dry rot, ancient rubber finally giving up. The smell of burnt tread and panic hung in the air. There was this Ford, all rust and sadness, sitting pretty on an unstable jack. He crawled under it, doing what he does, and the jack decided to tap out, dropped the whole front end like an anchor. Lucky for him, he'd tossed a block of wood under the frame earlier. That piece of scrap held the weight and probably saved his chest from turning into a pancake. The jack, that thing got tossed in the corner and renamed Widowmaker forever. You don't mess around under a car unless something solid's got your back. Crawling into a car that's been sealed for decades is like walking into a biohazard lab without a suit. He opened the door of an old Chevy, took a breath, and nearly choked. The cabin was a petri dish, mold, rat poop, mystery sludge on the seats. He got halfway through the teardown before his eyes started leaking. Breathing felt like inhaling a pillow full of dust. He pressed on, but the wheezing lasted for days. Health warning? Absolutely. Did he wear a mask next time? Only sometimes. Mold doesn't scare him, but it should. Mid-drive, the hose popped loose. Fuel spilled in the trunk, near wires. The smell hit first, then the panic. He grabbed the fire extinguisher, cracked the windows, and drove with one hand on the wheel, the other gripping the extinguisher like it was a baby. That car didn't light up, but the odds were close. Too close. One job looked simple. Fix the spark, fire it up, drive it out. Easy. The reality? Engine coughed once, then died. Middle of the desert. No towns, no help, no cell signal.
Crank it, see if it works. Barely. But it works.
It works.
Just him, a dead car, and an afternoon sun that cooked bones. He pulled wires, spliced junk together, and rewired the ignition with the kind of grit that makes people cuss under their breath. The vultures showed up, circling above like they knew something. He finally got the thing running, barely, and limped it home. Sunburnt, dehydrated, furious. One didn't slither fast enough. He jumped back, arms flailing, nearly fell into a ditch. He still reached in, grabbed what needed grabbing, and pulled the car out of the weeds. But not before earning a few bites and a bunch of spider webs, in places no one wants a spider webs. Rescuing a van during an ice storm with no traction is not a great plan, but he showed up with a trailer and hope. The driveway was pure ice. The tow vehicle had bald tires. The van slid sideways and off the ramp twice. Both times he dove like a stunt double, missing the falling van by inches. The wind howled, the sleet hit sideways, and his boots lost grip at every step. He looked like a snowman being mugged by gravity, but he got the van loaded somehow. Wet, frozen, half broken, but alive. Old batteries don't play nice. Him fiddling with a 6-volt system on a vintage Cadillac accidentally crossed the wires. The zap hit hard. Arms tingled. Vision sparkled. He staggered back like the car had slapped him across the face. It wasn't enough to send him to the ER, but it was enough to make him think about every life choice leading up to that second. Electricity doesn't care about intentions. It just hits. People see the final product, the drive-away shot, the working motor. What they don't see is the car trying to hurt him behind the scenes. He wears the bruises, the burns, and the cuts like part of the job. If a car's been dead for 40 years and catches fire on startup, should you still try to drive it cross-country? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, and subscribe for more chaos on wheels.